Good evening. Thank you for taking part in the Lessons of Vietnam show. I'm your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam from June 67 through June 68. I was stationed at Long Bend Post. Here in the Lessons of Vietnam show, our mission is to tell the real story of the American Vietnam War. And please, if you hear anything during the show from myself or a guest that you feel is not correct, let us know. It's important to get the right information out. You are invited to take part in any live show. Please see the contact information there on your screen. We welcome your interaction and comments during the show. As you can see there, broadcast courtesy of Nissan Communications. If you want to get in touch with me, it's dixonbill80 at yahoo.com. But during the show, feel free to call in at 919 518 9773, or even better, go on to Skype and put in Computers 2K Voice, sign in, and interact with me, or we have a special guest tonight, and ask Tom questions or whatever you'd like to do. Tonight's show, as I've already told you, we are very privileged to have Vietnam veteran Arthur Tom Baker as our guest. We'll be talking about his time in Vietnam and his outstanding book, The Hawk and the Dove. And as you can see there, we're always concerned about the veterans. If you are a veteran and you know someone that's, or you know someone out there that's in crisis, please call these numbers and get some help. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of good people looking out to help all the veterans out there. So if you know someone, please do that. This is the cover of the book, A Hawk and the Dove by Tom. And down here at the bottom, it says James H. Meredith, President, Ernest Hemingway Foundation Society. And it says, this is a rare novel about war that combines both gripping combat sequences and informed commentary about the ultimate consequences of that combat experience. Only the most thoughtful writers about war will do that. Hemingway did it for Whom the Bell Tolls. Tom Baker has done it for The Hawk and the Dove. Tom, that's a pretty, there's Tom there with his book. That's good. That was a pretty strong statement by this man. And that's I think that I've listened to some of your readings of the of different chapters and so forth, and I think he's got it right on mark. And takes a combat guy, I guess, to go in and do that. But thank you for being with us. Tom is coming from the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, and he's a member of Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 994. And Tom, come in and tell us about how you got to Vietnam and what you did and so forth.
First, Bill, thank you very much for allowing me to be on your program. And a quick note on Mr. Meredith's blurb on my novel. It was very humbling. He understood when I got him the novel. He understood what I was trying to do, and it was very humbling. Is the best word that people in his caliber understand it. So I was very thankful for him. As you said, my name is Tom Baker, and I'm a combat vet from Vietnam. I'm also an Army brat. I was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky. My father was an old brown boot sergeant major. And if you've ever seen that movie, We Were Soldiers, with Sam Elliott's character, I tell people my daddy was just a little bit less gruff than Sam Elliott's character, Sergeant Major Plumley. So I grew up in the military, and when I came of age, my SAT scores were pretty low, so I just raised my hand and said, okay. I had two brothers in at the time anyway, so I went in April of '67. I wound up going airborne. I was a pretty gung-ho young man, and I went airborne. Really wanted to get into Ranger School. Went through advanced infantry training, and wanted to get into Ranger School. But right after jump school, asked the first sergeant if I could get into Ranger School, and he said, "Baker, you're too young." I think he was lying to me. I think they needed riggers, but he sent me to rigger school. Rigger school was an important job, but it was kind of rear echelon, and I hated it. As soon as I got out of rigger school, I went to NOM. So I was a parachute rigger, and I was a grunt. And I got over to Vietnam on the 21st day of February 1968, stationed at Phu Bai, which is about 30 some miles south of Hue. The Tet Offensive was cooling down somewhat, but they still needed quick reaction forces. So I rigged skid loads that went into Quezon because that was the only way they could get resupply. And I went on missions with the 2nd Battalion, and we mostly did fill-ins and village sweeps, but I did that for about 4.5 months, and got drunk one night and told the first sergeant I was tired of that shit. And he said, well, Baker, he said, you can get out here in a body bag, or you can be dumb enough to be a door gunner. So I transferred out to be a door gunner. The first of the night, first cab. They were up at Camp Evans, so I didn't have to move far, but it was a lifetime. It was pretty serious. We flew up around Dong Ha and the rock pile in that area, and then I guess it was about latter part of August, 1st September, the first cab moved south to a place called Phuc Vinh, which was not far from the Fishhook area on the Mekong River. So I finished up my tour down there, and it was pretty hot down there. We flew a lot of missions, and I may get back into that a little bit. But where I'm trying to go with that is that when, as a door gunner, if you survive within the last 2 weeks, normally they would put you on milk runs and do some maintenance around the shop, but we were short on door gunners, and I flew till I had 3 days left on my tour. Almost got shot down. I'd been shot down once, and went down once with mechanical failure, but I almost got it again that day. So we got hit that night. I flew out of Phuc Vinh and dud rocket round. Last picture I've got of me and Nam was me holding that 122 millimeter rocket dud. But I'm telling you this stuff to kind of give you the feel for how it was when I got to Cam Ranh Bay to fly out. My best friend, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, had stayed with the 101st, and he had just been killed. The Quick Reaction Force got ambushed, and he was killed. It got hand to hand, and he was my brother. He was my buddy, and that had me tore all to pieces. And we got ready to fly out, and they had a young Marine there that had a leather strap around his neck, and on that strap he had 2 ears that he had taken off of NVA, who had just killed his best friend. They wasn't going to let him on the plane with that, but a Marine captain got him aside, and somehow those ears disappeared, and he got on the plane. But so we flew out of there. There was a lot of 1,000-yard stairs, and we flew into Seattle, and they told us over the loudspeaker that there'd be protesters there, and sure enough, we got off the plane, we kissed the ground, and we hugged and cried and hooped and hollered and went in the terminal, and there they were, about 18 or 20 protesters. Where we walked, there was a wire mesh that separated us, wire mesh fence separated us from them, and they were calling us names. If you've seen that movie Rambo, that baby killer stuff sticks with you, and they were throwing paper bags of, I guess, dog shit up against the fence, and it was hard on me, and so many years later, when I start to write this book, this novel, one of the main purposes was to tell people that warriors, at least most warriors, are not baby killing thugs. We're just men and women put in very difficult positions, doing the very best they can to accomplish their mission, but keep themselves and their buddy alive. So, when I was back and, raise a family and stuff, and you kind of have your mind occupied, but 30 years later, the kids are grown, and the demons start coming out, and bourbon can grip your soul. And one night I just about blew my brains out. And I thought to myself then, I've got to start some sort of healing process. This was about 10 years ago. And the novel started forming in my head. I wanted to tell people that warriors down through the ages have mostly been men and women doing the best they can. Sure, there's always the crazy ones, the hardcore, but most of us and most of them. So the ideal of the hawk and the dove, I married a little peace hippie, my second wife, and she helped me understand the peace initiatives. And so I took it to heart, and this novel started forming. There's always been 4 periods in history that really hit me hard: the Viking era, the Norsemen, the Peninsular War, which a lot of people don't know about. It was fought against Napoleon in the early 1800s, and the Civil War, the Second World War, and then Vietnam and the killing fields of Rwanda. So those are the eras that the novel covers. And the novel was a healing for me, but it was also to make that statement that down through the ages, they were Vikings that just wanted to have more room and get out of that frozen north. And so it was telling that story. Now, I'd like to read just a little bit on the introduction, the first page, and I'll start talking about the novel some here. And Bill, if you've got any questions along the way, ask them. But the introduction, The Hawk and the Dove, is a series of tales about war and the tremendous human struggle for peace down through the ages. Come sail with the spirits of warriors past, spirits that are bound together by love and challenged by hate and war. Travel through 11 centuries with these people, these warriors, as they seek a seemingly simple thing, lasting peace. Listen to the spirits as they teach the armed warrior and the warrior for peace that their quests are similar. So that's pretty much what it states all the way through the novel. Now, again, the first part of the novel is the Norseman, and it's this 3-ship raiding party. The head Norseman is a guy by the name of Thorma, an old combat vet, and his son, whose name is Tom Lee, is a young guy, 17 years old. He had been on one raid prior to this one that the book starts on, and he had killed his first man there, and our boy, the guy was about 16, and Tom Lee didn't have that killer urge that a lot of the other Vikings in the group. So he started getting these ideals that there was a better way, and it wasn't easy convincing his daddy, who was a hardcore individual, but eventually it kind of got to that. Now, another piece, and still in the Norseman here, a little introduction to it. The year was 897, and the world lay deep in the womb of the Dark Ages. It would be another 500 years before the birth of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment. This was a time when, in the minds of many, the old gods still walked the earth, their mystic powers holding sway over mortal men. The light of Christianity had only begun to flicker in the darkness, and words such as honor, mercy, and fairness were uttered only in the tales of the bards. So it gives you a little sense of how things were going. Now, in the initial attack here, this raiding band is coming into this village, and it's a village in Scotland on the west side. It's Oban, and there's 3 of the dragon ships, and they had come ashore, and they had drank their mead, and they'd beat their drums and getting the courage, and they started up through the village. And Thorma, who was the leader of the band, his brother Olaf is one of those hardcore kill crazy individuals. So I want to read a few pieces through as we go through this and kind of give you a feel. This part touched heavy with me because those of y'all out there that have been in combat and have killed people, it comes back to you sometimes. There's the righteous kills, and then there's the ones that you just wonder about. So with gusto and unrelenting force, the blood of helmeted warriors swept through the band of armed villagers like the Roman legions had swept through the wild, unorganized Celtic tribes 1,000 years before. Smoke soon enveloped the huts closest to the beach as the faster warriors spread havoc. Flames streaked the filthy sky as an awful wail seemed to creep along the streets between the burning huts. Bodies lay everywhere as Thorma slowly walked up the beach. Presuming the man dead, he began to step over the body of a young man whom his brother Olaf had just disemboweled. As he looked down, the man's eyes flew open, and he looked up painfully at the big Norseman. "It is a terrible thing to watch a sword rip open a man's stomach," said Thorma, speaking aloud to the dying villager. The man, boy really, he looked only about 15, was desperately trying to keep his bowels from spilling onto the blood-soaked sand. Crying now, he pleaded for mercy. Thorma didn't understand all the words he spoke, but he knew the look. Standing over the prone figure, Thorma's shadow fell across the youth's face like a bad omen. Slowly he raised his sword, its edge reflecting red from the nearby flames. He hesitated for only a second as the boy tightly closed his eyes. Then he drove the death-bringer into the boy's heart. Silence hung damp and heavy for a moment after the boy gave a pitiful grunt, his body twisting in pain. Then he lay still. A ghostly voice from long ago whispered in Thorma's ear, then vanished in a rush of noise and confusion. So it's a case where those demons, they just don't go away. They'll come back from time to time. Now, Tom Lee is in part of this charge, and he comes upon a young maiden in the village who was a healer, and she's a strong woman, and he thought he would just take her, and she stopped him dead in his tracks, and they become later on husband and wife, but they sought peace, and they actually talked Thorma into becoming warriors for peace, and it's pretty interesting. But they had to fight a lot of their own people and a lot of the local tribesmen. So it's a good story, trying to begin the process of telling the story about warriors for peace. Now, the second section is the Peninsula War, and it's when Napoleon in the early 1800s had an army, and he took over Spain and was pushing down through Portugal and had just about wiped out the Portuguese army. And the only thing standing in the way was the remnants of the Portuguese army and some soldiers, British soldiers, commanded by Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. And in this novel, my hero is a guy from Oban, where the raid took place years before. He's a Scotchman, and he's with the 10th Highlander Regiment. But he is a skirmisher, which were like the early LRP. I mean, they were the early LRPs, long-range recon. So they sought out the enemy lines. And McKinney is a good man, but he's a hard man, and he's just came into this village, and they had to fight the French, and he's killed several of them, and he rescued this woman and her child, and McKinney's trying to clean up the job there. So I'm going to read a little piece here if I can find the right page. All right. Struggling a little bit here, but anyway, it was a section that McKinney was trying to figure out what to do with this woman, and she had nowhere to go, and McKinney knew that the British would, the French would kill her with all those dead troops. Okay, here it is. Crawford, you and Kuntz hide the bodies in the cellar. Clean the floor as best you can. McKinney paused. Do it quickly, he ordered. Standing off to the side, he pondered what to do with the woman and her child. After a few minutes, he walked over to where she knelt. You know the French will find these bodies sooner or later. You can't stay here. He spoke in a low voice, afraid he would wake the child, who had finally gone back to sleep but stirred slightly. I have nowhere to go, she stated flatly, fighting back tears. They killed both my father and earlier my husband. My mother died 2 years ago from the pox. My father was English. He was killed just because he was English. Can you believe that? For simply being an Englishman? God, how can men be so cruel? McKinney, not all men are that cruel, ma'am, even during war. And this war will end someday. All wars do. McKinney, watching the dead Frenchman being dragged unceremoniously down the steps of the cellar, their heads banging with a thud on each step. The rats will feast tonight, he thought as he brought his eyes back to the woman. What will you do when this war ends, Mr. McKinney? Asked Elizabeth, looking into his eyes, hoping to get a glimpse of the man. I'm not sure, ma'am. Find another war, I suppose. It's the only thing I seem to be good at anymore, he replied, a little unsure of where the ceremony was going. She stared at him. I doubt that very much. McKinney glanced around the room. I think there will always be a need for men like me, mainly because there will be men like them. He nodded at the French colonel. Men who would want to take that which is not theirs. He looked at the bloodstains on the floor. These men must be stopped. He turned his gaze toward her battered face. Men like me and these boys, he nodded as a group, we try to stop them. Without hesitating, Elizabeth answered, well, why? She was intrigued. Every man has his own reasons, ma'am. Some join for the sixpence and the rum the king pays us each day. Some join to see the world or stay out of jail. And some join because they think it's the right thing to do. So those reasons were the same reasons that many of us joined and went to Nam, you know. There was many of them that just, it was the military or jail. And I was a young Army brat. I thought we was going to save the world from democracy. So I was trying to make a statement that the same motives and drives have pushed young men and women into service on down through the years. And this story is pretty good. The hawk and dove come into play a little bit less than this one than it did in the first one, but it's a good story about the era, the early 1800s, and I think my readers will enjoy it. Most of them have. Now the third part is the Civil War.
Tom, let me ask you a question here.
Right.
The hawk would be the warrior, and then in both cases the woman, would that be the dove that's kind of bringing them around? I mean, both of them are similar stories, and you can really relate to being the Vietnam vet and going to another country and meeting the people there and so forth. So I can see that. I just want to clarify for our listeners out there that we're kind of you don't have to be a Vietnam vet to relate to this, but it's kind of it's kind of how we felt and so forth being in Vietnam, even though it goes back to Viking days. It all fits in our overall story and our stories.
It does. It's everything from war brides to nurses, and now in Iraq and Afghanistan, you had fighter pilots, chopper pilots. Women can play a serious role in combat. Now, the hawk and the dove was. There are many great historical fiction writers of war out there, and I wanted a little bit of a twist. And having married a peace advocate, I wanted to show that even down through the ages, and I did a lot of research on this, and there were a lot of female warriors, and that they fought and died, for their causes. And so the hawk and the dove worked together most of the time. There were some issues on into the last part, the Rwanda killing fields. You'll see that I had. It's difficult to put yourself into a female position and thinking as a combat vet, but I did it, and my wife seemed to think it fit well, and other women have too. So it's the hawk and the dove.
Well, go ahead and go ahead and start your part about the Civil War. I know there's a lot of women who were involved in the Civil War who dressed as men to get by, so they could be with their husbands and so forth. So,
yeah, the Civil War was a tough war, and it's another section that resonated with me hard, particularly the Gettysburg battle and Pickett's charge, and it's not only that, but the whole. My great grandfather, Samuel Pinckney Connor, fought with the 29th North Carolina, and I would never know, but I would hope that he wasn't for slavery. I would have hoped that he was a lot of the Southern boys, especially that were away from the big plantations. They fought because of what they thought was their state, and they were going with it. But it was not a real good. Was not an easy topic for me to touch on, but if there's a lot of things I learned in Nam is that we all bleed the same color, and that movie We Were Soldiers, where the colonel made the speech in front of the battalion and said,
Colonel Hal Moore.
Yeah, Hal Moore, and said, in combat, you won't care what color the skin is of the man that has your back, nor will you care by what name he calls God. And you're trying to stay alive, and he's trying to help you, and that was an early lesson for me, and it's been my guiding light through life, and I wanted to say that. So in the Civil War section, I've got a young Confederate soldier who's wounded, and he is brought into a hospital where he's treated by this female nurse who helped him, and they begin a relationship, but she's trying to understand him, and he's trying to understand her. And there's a part here where they're talking, and she's explaining how her father owned slaves, and she was glad when they left, and he shouts, "This damn war ain't about slavery, it's about states' right." He glared back at her with a mixture of anger and defiance. She held his gaze. "That business about states' rights might be what your friends say around the campfires at night, or what some of these local preachers shout from their pulpits, but it's about slavery." And when I talked at the Citadel, there were several Black kids that were cadets in the classes, and they resonated with that comment because, probably their great grandparents had been slaves. So it was a important topic to discuss, but it was also one of those that had always resonated with me. And So there's another piece in that Civil War, the Grand Parade, that I'd like to read. Uh, the hero is he's escaped from the prison, from the hospital, because he's going to send him to a prison camp, and he got back to his unit, and they moved north with Longstreet, and he's trying to find his commander. They're fixing to start Pickett's charge, and he's looking around for his company commander. Kenneth's eyes scanned the battered woodline in search of Smith. Small drummer boy walked up to him out of the cordate haze. The boy looked to be about 13 or maybe 14 years old and wore a uniform that was much too large for his skinny frame. A battered old drum attached to a worn leather strap that crossed the boy's bony shoulders rested against his stomach. He looked at Kenneth's stump of an arm and then looked up at Kenneth's weathered face. "Does it hurt to get shot?" the boy asked. Kenneth looked down at the obviously frightened young boy and tried to think of something noble to say, but he simply couldn't find the words. So instead, he answered as truthfully as he could. "Yes, son, it hurts like hell, but only for a little while." Kenneth paused, struggling to make sense. "But running away," he went on, "would hurt all the rest of your life." Kenneth watched the boy blink a couple of times and nervously fidget with his drum strap. "I ain't gonna run, Sergeant," replied the boy before taking a deep breath, turning and walking towards the front of the column. Now, that was an important part to me because, Bill, you know, during Vietnam, they were a lot of people that deed him out. They went to Canada. I had some friends that were fixing to be drafted, inducted, and we went to Knoxville together, and they took handfuls of salt tablets to get their blood pressure up. And they failed the physical and didn't have to go. Years later, they came up to me and apologized, said they wished that they had to live with that their whole life. So running away, you got to live with it your whole life. So I wanted to put that part in there, and you know, I was young and gung ho, and I raised my hand, but there was a lot of draftees that went, and they fought just as bravely as anybody. They did their part.
Tom, for those of us, some of our visitors out there watching the show, not necessarily Vietnam veterans, so I want to go back to when you said DDay Mao. That's the kind of mixture of French and Vietnamese for run away, get the hell out of here, or whatever. So I just wanted to make sure people understood what you were talking about there.
Yeah, we made that mention a minute ago of the French, English, Vietnamese words. There are others that we want to use on the air, but yeah, DDay Mao, they just left and went to Canada, and then I've ran into a few of those guys, and some of them won't admit that they maybe should have stayed and would felt better about it. A few of them were really hardcore and they thought it was a route, but it came at a price. Now the fourth part is the World War II section, and I've got a kid out of the mountains of North Carolina as the hero. And you know, I told you earlier I always wanted to be an Army Ranger and never got to be the Ranger, but I'll make him a Ranger, and he's going through jump school before he gets into to Ranger school. And there's a section here that might resonate with any of the paratroopers out there, so I'd like to read it. A grizzly old jump master walked down the aisle between outstretched legs, and his shouting could be heard above the revving engines. "These are barf bags," he shouted, holding up one of the bags for everyone to see. "If you need one, take one, but make damn sure you take it with you when you exit my aircraft." I could hear our jump master saying those exact same words. The jump master was an E6, 3 stripes up and 1 down. He walked with a slight limp. The limp came courtesy of a round from a German machine gun in North Africa. William's mind raced through all the instructions he had led to this point. He was about to jump out of a perfectly good airplane willingly. God, let my chute open was the unspoken prayer that was spoken in so many of the young minds. Now, the jump master is standing there and he's grinning like they always did. And his first order comes outboard stick, stand up. Men struggle to stand. Inboard stick, stand up. Now the sticks were just squads. They, that's the airborne language for the squad was the stick in the aircraft. They were lined up on either side of the plane. Everybody in the aircraft was now on their feet. Hearts were racing as birth bags were stuffed in shirt pockets or simply grasped tightly in stamped, sweaty hands. The next command echoed through the fuselage. Equipment check, and each man's eyes were on the chute of the man in front of him, checking to make sure all the lines and straps were in the right place. A few wise guys, and I seen that in my first jump too, joked about problems on their friend's chute, but for the most part, it was serious business. The jump master stifled a laugh behind a wicked smile as he watched the nervous GIs wait his next call. Hook up, he shouted, and 50 static lines snapped shut on the main line that ran along both sides of the aircraft from the front to the back. All eyes were on the jump master as the wannabes held their collective breaths for the next command. Stand in the door. A baby-faced second lieutenant shuffled in the door. Normally, you always, if there was an officer in the company, you let him go first. And my first jump, I was about 3 back from the first guy, and you could see that Georgia pine forest coming underneath of it. It was quite exhilarating. So you're standing there, and the lieutenant's in the door, and the jump master's got his hand on his shoulder, and you're watching the light, and it's still red, and all of a sudden the light changed from red to green, and the jump master shouted, "Go, go." He released his grip on the lieutenant's shoulder and gave him a push. Lieutenant Stone leaped from the door, and the next soldier stepped up to take his place. That soldier disappeared as well, and William was next in the door. His training kicked in, and he paused for a second, looked at the ground, rushed by. Then too, he was gone. He tucked his body from reflex and began to count. 1001, 1002. The wind roared in his ears as his body fell through the hot Georgia air. 1003, his feet were slowly coming up even with his body. The ground was rushing towards him as fast as when he said 1004, your hand would already be reaching for the handle on your reserve chute. And you could feel the slight tug of the chute as it slipped in the bag. Now, when I read that to a few old jumpers, and their eyes just light up, they remember that your first jump. So, but this story goes on, and they're part of the 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers, and they go in at DDay. The real 2nd Battalion went off the landing crafts, and they climbed the cliffs. In my story, I had a squad that went around and went up on top from the backside, and it created a little situation where the partisan that's leading them is indeed the hawk in a human form. So it's kind of intriguing, and there again, I did a bunch of research on that, and I think you'll thoroughly enjoy that part of the novel. Now, getting on into the last piece, it's the Warrior for Peace, and the hero is a female, and she is the daughter of the guy in the Second World War section. So that's the only real family connection. But it gets her into Vietnam as a nurse, and then brings her back as a peacekeeper for the UN. One of the reasons I put this piece in there was I read a book called Shaking Hands with the Devil, and it was written by a Belgian colonel at the time who was in Rwanda. And that's when the two tribes, the Tutsis and the Hutus, were really killing each other. The Hutus had been marginalized by the Belgians for years. They didn't have the Caucasian features that the Tutsis did, so they got second-class jobs. There's a lot of hatred. And when the Belgians started pulling out, these Interahamwe created raiding parties, and they just slaughtered. It was a genocide, basically, what it was. But this Belgian colonel was ordered out of this one village, and when the plane left, he looked down and he seen the Interahamwe coming into the village, killing people. And I thought to myself, I could never do that. I would not have left. I know that means disobeying a direct order, but so in this story, I bring that situation to bear, and I have a young captain that's there, and the female is going to try to go over and talk to the Interahamwe because nobody else had. She's trying to find a peaceful way, and she's walking away from Jeff Bruni, who is the Belgium UN peacekeeper. And Jeff Bruni stood as if his feet were planted in the earth. His brain screamed, "Go after her," as she walked away. At the exact moment, his radio operator rushed up to him. "Captain Bruni, Captain Bruni," the young soldier shouted as he slowed his pace to a fast walk as he neared. "What is it, Corporal?" growled Bruni as he watched Faith walk away. "Captain, it's the Colonel, and he's mad as hell." Corporal whispered the last words as if his voice might carry over the airwaves even with the mic off. The nervous radio operator handed Bruni the headset, and both men could hear Colonel Mike Karumba's voice booming over the earpiece. Bruni stared at the mic for a second before sliding the headset over his head. "Sir, this is Captain Bruni," announced the Belgian. He pulled the earpiece away from his ear when Karumba thundered. "It's about damn time you answered my call, Captain." His harsh tone was never changing. "You, Captain, must get your people out of that village. Now, right now. Do you understand me?" He shouted over the mic. "But, sir," pleaded Bruni as he watched the American woman continue walking towards the rebels. There was silence on Karumba's end for a second, and Bruni went on. "Sir, you know the Interahamwe will move into this village the moment we leave. We can't allow that to happen." Bruni's head snapped back when Karumba's voice shouted into his ear. "Captain, I don't have time to argue with you. I want you and your men and that damned American woman out of that village in 30 minutes. That, Captain," Karumba nearly spat the words, "is an order." Bruni held the headset away from his ear and looked at it again as if it was an alien thing. His head spun as he turned and watched the American draw closer to what he knew was certain death. With his hands down by his side, he looked around and saw that many of the villagers had huddled in small groups near the center of town. Several small children cried in their mother's arms as the old men squatted in a resolved position in front of them, stoically waiting. They knew what would happen when the soldiers left. It had happened all over their country many times. The Belgian soldiers milled around their trucks and looked expectantly over at their commander. Bruni's first sergeant locked eyes for a moment, and then Bruni sadly closed his. He shook his head, took off the mic, and spoke into the mic. "Sir, I respectfully refuse that order. I will not stand down and allow these people to die without at least trying to help them. They're human beings, sir, and it's the least that we can do." He paused for a heartbeat before he went on. "That, sir, is called principle." Karumba's voice was screaming now. "Your career is over, soldier. Do you hear me? It's over if you do not." Click. Captain Bruni, with 12 years in the military and a bright future ahead, clicked off the radio as the colonel's angry threat hovered in the air. The young radio operator took the headset from his captain and saluted. "Sir, the men are all with you on this. We have to help these people." Bruni looked at his corporal a little confused, then turned and looked at the American. He snapped out of his confusion, though, when he saw how close she was to the rebels. "Corporal, tell Sergeant Forkles to get all the villagers into what remain of the orphanage. he can set a good perimeter there and then wait until I get back. Yes, sir, snapped the corporal, who started running towards the truck. But after a few strides, the young soldier stopped in his dash back to the waiting troop. Turning, he shouted to Bruni, who was racing towards the woman. Sir, he paused an uncomfortable second. What if? Bruni smiled at the unasked question. These people need your help, soldier. If I don't return, just do your best to stop any more slaughter. The two exchanged salutes and ran in different directions. So I won't get into the ending on that. It's a good ending. And you folks out there that are interested can just buy my novel and read it and find out. But there again, it sort of tells the story through all 5 chapters that soldiers and warriors down through the ages have been men and women just trying to do the very best they can under difficult circumstances to accomplish their mission, but try to stay alive and keep their buddies alive. And that's what I tried to say in this novel. That and one other thing that was part of it, that it's the motto of the Vietnam Veterans Organization. Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. And we have reached out to the younger vets, trying to help them so that they don't have the problems that we had when we come back from Vietnam. So it was a healing deal for me to write the novel, and I kind of did it secondhand, but it also enabled me to write my memoir, which is firsthand and hopefully will be out maybe this summer. So there you have it, Bill. That's
all right,
that's
Tom. I appreciate all that. And you mentioned a while ago that you had your family and you work, and then as you started retiring a little bit, those demons started coming back. And I hear that more and more from Vietnam veterans. We're so busy making a life, and all of a sudden now we find a little bit of time on our hands, and it's amazing the thoughts that start coming back. And hopefully this book will help some other Vietnam vets. I know that when you mentioned a while ago, you obviously had some problems with post-traumatic stress, and I think the book going through kind of hits that all the way through to a certain extent with all your heroes through it, their version of post-traumatic stress.
It does, and what people need to understand is that PTSD has been around since cavemen threw rocks at each other, and it's nothing new. Battle fatigue, they called it in the Second World War, shell shock. There was a lot of articles written. Mark Twain even wrote about how during the Civil War, the vets couldn't come back into small towns that they left out of. They weren't understood, and then they went out west, and sadly that's when they started picking on the Indians and running them out. But PTSD is a demon that these young kids that are going on so many combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. My nephew was EOD with the Navy, and he pulled 3. I've got some Ranger buddies that have pulled 5 and 6. There used to be an old saying in Nam, Bill, you've maybe heard that. If you pull one combat tour, unless you really seen buku stuff, you come back, okay. You pull 2 combat tours and you're going to be a little messed up. You pull 3 and you ain't the same person. And so society needs to understand that. We've got about 40 vets in our little local Jackson County veterans group, and we've lost 4 out of that to suicide in the last 3 years, and 2 more spouses of veterans. So that veteran suicide is a terrible thing, and the more people understand, and hopefully this novel will help them understand that it's been going on a while. we got to help these vets, and
Well,
that's
Tom,
what.
along those lines, you're doing that there at the university. There, you started an organization for veterans, or part of you helped start an organization for veterans and give them support and so forth.
Yes. We started it about 8 years ago when these vets first started coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, in a concerted effort to make sure that they had somebody there for them. And we did a lot of things for them. We had we didn't call them meetings. We had gatherings, and we talked about the veteran humor being a little tough. We'd laugh, and sometimes we'd cry, and sometimes we'd just sit there and just be that camaraderie. We might bitch about it in the military, but it's one of the things that we miss when we get out. And going on to that, like I said, when you first get out of the military, you may be in school, you may have family, and you're busy, but sooner or later those demons are going to come back, and you need to face them. And we try to help each other face those demons.
It's like the saying, "When were you in Vietnam?" Last night.
Do what, sir?
When were you in Vietnam? Last night. You were in Vietnam last night.
Yeah.
It's there every day. Somewhere along the line, a smell, a sound, a noise, and you're back in Vietnam.
Yep. It's that deal of loving the 4th of July, but hating the fireworks. And,
Amen.
And when I was an avid hunter before I went, and when I came back, I bow hunted, but it took me many years until my son was actually old enough to hunt that I went back hunting with a rifle, because I had done enough. So there's a lot of changes that occur. Some people it doesn't affect that way, but it did me.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I got my book through Amazon. How people out here watching this from all over the world, how can they find your book?
Well, it's sold in the major bookstores, Books A Million and Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Those are the three big ones. If they wanted to go to PayPal, they can get it directly from us. But those three avenues are pretty much it. So we've tried to reach out to the local what's called the indie bookstores, and they have us on file. If you have a local bookstore, you can go to them and they'll look it up. I mean, it's registered. It's a regular novel, so they can find it.
All right, I know I found mine on Amazon. Well, listen, while you were talking, Eddie Lee checked in. Eddie Lee
Right.
checked in, and I want to read what he said.
Okay.
I am so proud to be watching Tom speak. He has endured so much and still committed to helping others.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, it's one of those things to where that's what we're supposed to be about is helping fellow veterans. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's like herding cats. But if we can save one veteran from killing themselves, then all this is worth it. And,
amen to that. You've got some other comments, and I'm gonna have Amnon read them for you.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom, those comments are not going to stay there when people are coming to watch the show later. So I want them to get on the record.
So to be part of the show.
Eddie Lee is also saying, I could listen to Tom for hours. What a wonderful writer. And Anne is saying, oh, wonderful, Tom. Love H&D.
That's great.
And Eddie adds, it is horrible that not enough is being done to help prevent the 22 average suicides a day. And Dove is saying, and I'll let you guys guess who Dove is. I cannot imagine a vet not suffering intensely upon return and needing careful help. Family, friends, loved ones need to be taught much more before it is too late. also. Facebook, she's saying where to find it. Facebook, The Hawk and Dove, shop now, and online via Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
You can go on Facebook to Hawk and Dove Facebook site, and Tom is reading a couple, chapters 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, we got an introduction. My nephew, who is a Air Force veteran, is a IT instructor, and he helped me put on some videos, and it's very informative on the novel. So we're trying to reach out to as many people as we can.
Well, there's a lot of veterans out there who need some help, and sometimes just a matter of someone that's willing to listen to them and let them know that they're there for them. As I mentioned,
Shows what you've got, Bill, are a big help, sir. And I salute you for y'all's efforts, and I'm just thrilled and humbled to be part of it.
Well, we appreciate so much for you being on tonight, trying to tell the real story of what happened. There's so much garbage about us out there, most of it untrue. I think the Vietnam vet probably went out of his way more than any soldier in the history of warfare to protect the civilians and so forth, especially the children and so forth. And I think calling us baby killers just was irrational. And just was wrong in so many ways. I mean, everywhere we went, the kids would flock to us, and we always had something for them: candy, cigarettes, ham and lima beans, because we didn't want them. But
we didn't want them.
No, we didn't want them at all. But that's a different story. But I do appreciate you being on, and we enjoyed. I hope all of you out there enjoyed our show tonight as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Tom, thank you so much for taking your time to tell us about your fantastic book, The Hawk and Dove. Those of you who have been with us, I know you want to get yourself a copy, and while you're getting yourself a copy, be sure and get a couple for your friends or for another vet especially. That's out there, and get one for you. And like I said, get a couple of them for Memorial Day is coming up. Be a great Memorial Day gift for a veteran. And as we're coming up, Tom, I'm looking forward. I want to book you already. As soon as that new book comes out, I want to get you back on to talk about that a little bit. And as you're coming in later, I wanted to maybe get you to come back and talk a little bit about how you put this book together. As I mentioned a while ago, I've been wanting to put my experiences down, and I didn't see as much combat as you did, but I just haven't been able to do it.
It took me 10 years, so it's one of those things to where you kind of just put the thoughts out there, and then you might want to come back a week later and redo them. Just trying to get the words right, and it's not an easy task, and you're trying to get into the truth and tell it like it is. And of course, mine being a historical fiction, it was somewhat easier, but when you get into like a memoir, it is harder, but it's worth the time and effort, because it's healing your soul.
That's what I have found with other guests I've had on the show. They didn't want to talk about Vietnam. I've had them on the show, and they tell their story, and they may cry when they leave, but they come back later and say, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I've had a young man that was on, a good friend of mine, that was a Silver Star recipient. His story was phenomenal. He hadn't been able to talk about it, was on the show, talked about it quite a bit, and cried most of the way home, but he really felt much better afterwards. So
that's all your counselors will tell you that. And so you did an awesome job helping him. So,
well, I want to point out to veterans out there, if I don't know whether do y'all have a vet centers where you are?
Yeah, there's one there's a big one in Asheville, and then there's a smaller one in Franklin, and they're trying to start that writing for healing. Daniel's also the Marine that was here a minute ago helping. He writes, and so we're trying to get that writing for healing group started here, and we'll get it started. It's just a slow process.
What I wanted to point out to veterans out there, sometimes we're a little hesitant about going to the VA. Whatever you say at the vet center, it stays at the vet center. It does not go on your record. You can say whatever you want to at the vet center, and it does not go on your record. If you go to the VA and it goes on a record, but if you go to the vet center, you can talk and meet other veterans there, and it stays. What happens at the vet center stays at the vet center. So don't be bashful. Go to the vet center, meet some other veterans out there, and they're there to help you.
We have a very good vet center here, and it's one of those things to where when you finally go and you see other vets that have got the same issues and thoughts and feelings that you've got, you don't feel as alone. Our motto was, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah. And I went kicking and screaming. For years, they've been trying to get me to go. And once I went there, I'm going, why did it take me so damn long? Because you start meeting other veterans and realize that, hey, we all got these same problems, and we sit around and talk and enjoy and tell jokes, and we probably don't even talk about Vietnam half the time we're there. We just have a good time in the camaraderie. Veterans can talk to veterans pretty good. So
yeah, so we need more veteran counselors. What we need.
Yes, sir. Can you talk about our next show? Can you believe it's our next show is in May? What happened to April? I mean, I just turned around and April was gone. The next Lessons of Vietnam show live broadcast will be VE Day, 8th of May. And you can go in and rewatch this show online. Just go back into Nissan Communications and click on to archives or on demand and watch the show. You can watch any of our other shows and so forth. And if you've got something you want to tell Tom, let me know, and I'll make sure he gets the information and so forth to him. And looking forward to that next novel, which is going to be your Vietnam veteran story, I understand.
It is, and it's called a young warrior wannabe, and it starts out as that son of a Army sergeant major. But it gets into Nam. I tried to get a little start with some humor, and then got into Nam, and it helped me. So, and I think it's a story that needs to be told. There's buku guys that seen more shit than I did, but we've seen enough. So,
for you out there who doesn't understand buku, that is one of the many words we used in Vietnam. That means a whole lot. Tom, thank you very much, and you have a good night and nice Memorial Day and so forth, and be waiting for your new book.
We'll be in touch. Thank you, and I salute you and your efforts.
Thank you, sir. Same back at you. Hang in. I'm going to talk to you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.